All right, let's dive into one of the single greatest achievements in human history, landing on the moon. The Apollo program is legendary, but it's also wrapped in all sorts of myths and questions. So today, we're going to dig in and sort out the facts from the fiction. And let's just start with the biggest question, the one that kicks this whole mystery off. After spending an unbelievable amount of money and effort to build the Saturn V rocket, literally the most powerful machine humans have ever created, why in the world would NASA just scrap the tools to build it? Why throw away the key to the moon? This leads us straight into one of the most stubborn myths about the Apollo program. The idea that NASA deliberately destroyed the blueprints, that they somehow lost the technology. But the real story is, well, it's a lot more complicated, and honestly, a lot more interesting than that. So the myth you always hear is that the blueprints were shredded, gone forever, but the reality? The plans are safe and sound, stored on microfilm. The real issue, the thing that actually grounded the Saturn V for good, is that it was built from millions of unique parts, made by thousands of different suppliers. It was a whole industrial ecosystem that just doesn't exist anymore. The best way to think about this is with a simple analogy. Imagine a car factory. They build this gigantic, custom machine just to stamp one specific car door for, say, a 1965 model. 10 years later, car designs have totally changed. What do you do with that old, massive tool? It only does one thing, it's taking up a ton of space, you just scrap it. That's exactly the logic that applied to the one-of-a-kind tools for the Saturn V. See, it was never about just destroying knowledge for the sake of it. It was about opportunity cost. To rebuild a Saturn V today, you wouldn't just be reading old blueprints. You'd have to resurrect an entire 1960s supply chain, relearn all the hands-on trial-and-error know-how that isn't written down, and spend a fortune to do it. It just made way more sense to build something new. And that decision to move forward makes even more sense when you understand the real reason for that laser focus on the moon in the first place. What was that race really all about? Publicly, the message was all about adventure, exploration, and uniting the country. President Kennedy's famous speech framed the whole thing as this noble quest, a way to rally the nation around a goal that seemed almost impossible. But behind that inspiring message, there was another, incredibly powerful force at work. Just a year before Kennedy's big speech, President Eisenhower, in his farewell address, gave this really stark warning about the growing influence of what he called the military-industrial complex. And Apollo was tied right into that. While it was a civilian program on the surface, make no mistake, this was a key battlefront in the Cold War. It was about showing the entire world, and especially the Soviets, who had the superior technology. It was a high-stakes propaganda win that was designed to look peaceful, turning the space race into a sprint, not a long-term journey. And man, to win that battle, the United States was willing to spend an amount of money that's almost hard to wrap your head around today. So what was the actual bill for this incredible undertaking? When you adjust for inflation, the Apollo program cost over $250 billion. Just let that number sink in. $257 billion. It's absolutely staggering. To try and put that into perspective, let's look at what that meant for the average person. The cost per person for Apollo was almost double what the recent CHIPS and Science Act cost. It was a massive, massive national investment, no matter how you slice it. But here's the really telling part. Look at when the spending peaked, 1966. That's a full 3 years before Neil Armstrong even took his first step. This shows you exactly what Apollo was, a massive front-loaded blitz to hit a single political target. It was never meant to be sustainable. Once the race was won, that budget dropped like a rock. Now, anytime you have a project this huge and this expensive, you're bound to attract some conspiracy theories. So let's take a minute and tackle a few of the most common hoax claims you still hear today. So first, let's just think about the people. The Apollo program employed over 400,000 individuals. 400,000. You had astronauts, engineers, scientists, factory workers, contractors. The idea that you could get that many people to all keep a secret of that size is, well, it's a pretty big hurdle for any conspiracy theory. And you don't have to take my word for it. Someone actually ran the numbers on this. A statistical study in 2016 calculated that a conspiracy with that many people involved would almost certainly be exposed by a whistleblower in under 4 years. And that's not even mentioning that the Soviet Union would have loved to be the one to expose a fake American moon landing. They were watching everything. Then, of course, you've got the pictures. This is one of the most famous bits of so-called evidence. Hey, if they're in space, how come there are no stars in any of the photos? The answer is actually really simple. It's just basic photography. The moon's surface and those bright white spacesuits were being blasted by direct sunlight. To get a decent picture without everything being completely blown out in white, the camera had to use a really fast shutter speed. And those settings were just nowhere near sensitive enough to pick up the faint light from distant stars. Okay, another one you hear all the time is about the Van Allen radiation belts. The argument goes that these rings of radiation around Earth are a deadly, impassable barrier that would have killed the astronauts. In reality, not an issue. The Apollo spacecraft were moving incredibly fast, so they passed through the most intense parts of the belts in a really short amount of time. That speed, plus the shielding on the spacecraft, kept the crew's radiation exposure down to a very minimal and totally safe level. So, once you strip away all the myths, misunderstandings, and conspiracies, what are we left with? What is the true, lasting legacy of the Apollo program? Because it's so much more than just flags and footprints. The answer is literally written in stone. Moonstone, that is. The astronauts brought back over 800 pounds of rocks and lunar soil, and that stuff completely revolutionized our understanding of the universe. For one, analyzing those rocks confirmed the giant impact theory, the idea that our moon was formed from the debris of a massive collision between a young Earth and another planet. That scientific haul basically created the field of modern planetary science as we know it. Think about this. Data from missions that flew over half a century ago has been used in more than 2,500 scientific papers. And even today, scientists are still requesting and studying these priceless samples, making new discoveries all the time. And that really brings us to the final thought here. Apollo wasn't just a technical achievement or a political power play, it was proof. It was a benchmark for what human beings are capable of when we align our science, our industry, and our political will toward one single audacious goal. And it kind of forces us to ask ourselves, what's our moonshot today?